welcome back to another episode of Film Lovers.
I'm Tim Schumacher.
And I'm Shannon Fletcher. We're lovers of film.
And lovers of each other.
It's been a minute.
It's been a few weeks / over a month since our last podcast. We have watched several movies in between, but getting the actual podcast done just hasn't materialized. I don't know what kind of podcast we would end up doing for the end of Evangelion, like we did last week.
Yeah, we did watch all of Evangelion.
All of it.
And some other stuff. I think, honestly, we've been playing D&D on the weekends, and that's kind of cut into podcast time in a big way.
Right.
But we watched a couple films this week that we want to talk about.
Absolutely.
So it's sort of a double feature again. The first film I want to talk about is Ford versus Ferrari.
And the second film we will be talking about is the 2018, I believe, winner of Cannes Film Festival, Border. And Border is one of those films that, it's hard to talk about without spoiling a lot of it, which is why we're doing the double feature. These films are completely unrelated. Mm-hmm. But it's nice to be able to talk about something that more people have seen recently, and it doesn't, there's no spoiling Ford versus Ferrari. I think everybody, if you don't know how it ends, it doesn't matter. It's more of just the story. I think the second I heard the title of the movie Ford versus Ferrari, a movie made in America, I assumed that Ford wins.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a correct assumption and also an incorrect assumption, because I think the real title could have been Ford versus Ferrari versus the Man.
Yeah.
Or Ford being the man. Ford versus Ferrari versus Christian Bale. Who I believe is not doing an accent. I think that's actually what he sounds like, because he's Welsh. And I think that movie finally let him do his own voice.
Oh, I never thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
He's been living in presumably the United States for so long. It's amazing that he still has such a thick accent, but.
Well, I could be wrong on that. I'm just kind of wondering how much of that was faked and how, he's finally going home and letting us hear what he sounds like, because Batman and Batman and Patrick Bateman sound exactly the same, because there are scenes where they're both wearing the same suit, because they're both rich guys in New York / Gotham. And that, while it might not have, I'm sure it was a pretty big stretch for him personally. Those roles seem similar to me, but this is something that kind of calls back to The Fighter that Christian Bale was also in, where he's down in the dirt of kind of a competition that people generally don't know a whole lot about.
All right, if you haven't seen it or it's been a while, the synopsis of Ford versus Ferrari is: an American automotive designer, Carroll Shelby, and fearless British race car driver Ken Miles battle corporate interference, the laws of physics, and their own personal demons to build a revolutionary vehicle for the Ford Motor Company together. They plan to compete against the race cars of Enzo Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in France in 1966. So the year is 1966. Ford Motor Company is doing very well. They are, I think, at that point, still the largest motor company in the United States of America, probably the world. But the story sort of begins with a boardroom type scene that lets you know that market share is declining. They are losing a lot of money to Chevrolet, which is kind of coming out with a slightly more innovative designs, capturing maybe a more younger audience. And that's sort of the problem that sets the stage for all of the events that are to come. There's a young Italian-American sort of upper middle management fella at Ford who pitches the idea that the company compete at Le Mans, which is the largest European on-road car race, in an attempt to sort of woo these younger, sort of less I don't know, there's this sort of post-war generation that's a little more interested in foreign goods and foreign cars than their parents were in the 60s. And he suggests that this big thing would be a marketing stunt to win those younger people over. But, like, it's an incredibly difficult race to win. And the Ford Motor Company had no, like, racing team at all at that point in time. So they kind of concoct this scheme to purchase Ferrari basically for the racing arm of Ferrari. Ferrari is totally bankrupt at this point in the 60s. And so the sort of first act of the film is them sort of pitching to Mr. Ferrari, here's, the deal. Here's how much money we're going to give you. And in turn, you're going to help us win Le Mans. And the best scene in the movie is Ferrari, who does not speak English, turning down that offer, spoiler alert, and telling Ford just what he thought of them and their cars and their big ugly factory in the United States of America. And it's really a wonderful speech about, and it's full of just slurs and insults. It's very shady little speech that Ferrari gives the middle management dudes at Ford who had come to represent Mr. Ford. Henry Ford II is the leader of Ford Motor Company at the time. And he tells them, like, you're not your father. The Ford Motor Company is a big, ugly factory producing ugly cars.
Small, ugly cars. And I think one important thing about that scene is that it is not subtitled. So I think what the movie is kind of telling you, to everyone who does not speak Italian, is that this man is making angry Italian noises. There are some words that are either subtitled or translated by a translator.
Yeah, there's a translator in the room, so you hear it.
But this film makes the choice not to translate some Italian in different parts of the movie. I think just to kind of give the viewer just a glimpse of naked anger and rage. It doesn't matter what he's saying. You would be angry at the Ford Motor Company if they approached your art product and wanted to use it to sell Fords in America, because that's what Enzo Ferrari in this movie is, and that's what this movie is really about: the struggle of art versus industry, and the people that want to commoditize and mass produce something. And honestly, cars are probably one of the better metaphors for that phenomenon. I mean, that phenomenon of making something pretty and soulful versus something that can be mass produced is something that's going to be found across many industries, but an industry that literally invented mass production and factories to do it and stamp things out exactly the same way. I mean, when you buy a Ferrari, you want to buy a Ferrari that checks off the boxes that are kind of glued to it in brand memory. But Enzo Ferrari comes off in this movie as someone that wanted to make a beautiful racing machine and did not want to get involved with the middle management bullshit that Ford Motor is full of, like any American corporation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the large flaw in the deal was that he was going to lose, like, a lot of control over the main product. Yeah. And he's a passionate Italian craftsman, and that was not going to fly. Right. I think Ferrari at the time was a slightly different brand. It was not as high-end, maybe, as it is today. But the guy had won Le Mans for, like, years straight. Yeah. He was the racing guy. But he wasn't difficult to beat. I mean, it was and wasn't difficult. The Americans, like, wiped the floor with them at the end of the movie. So there is also a kind of a storyline about, like, that sort of traditional pride not actually being all it was stacked up to be in the end. He just made really beautiful cars that were nice and fast as well.
Well, this is 1966, and cars hadn't been figured out yet. And what I mean by that is, like, if you watch NASCAR, everyone's going at 200 miles an hour in essentially the same car, because years and years of mechanical engineering have really created an optimized racing vehicle that most people agree on. I don't think companies are still... I mean, right now it comes down to the driver and less the vehicle. And there are modifications that can be done to shave off halves of a second, and that's always going to be the case. But this is an era where racing was much less standardized, and I think they were still on the forefront of what could be done. Like, yeah, the Americans ended up wiping the floor with him, but like, they wiped the floor with him because his car blew up. You know, there was
a little bit of luck involved. I think we didn't really do hot takes. Mm-hmm. For me, my hot take is that there's this wonderful line. Matt Damon plays Carroll Shelby, and he says to Henry Ford II in one heated scene that you can't do anything amazing by committee. And my hot take is that it's a story about genius and how genius only occurs in singular people. Mm-hmm. There's Enzo Ferrari, who is a genius. There's Ken Miles, who is a genius. And there's Henry Ford I, who is a genius. And around them are infrastructures of people who work for them or work with them or whatever. And all those things do, all that those systems do is like dilute their genius. And like being someone who works in a creative field inside of capitalism, like that message resonated with me a lot. Creativity and true innovation do not happen in groups. Great ideas like that obviously like get executed by large groups, but letting a genius be themselves is kind of the key to doing something amazing, like winning Le Mans, inventing an automobile, or designing like the world's most beautiful cars, which is kind of Enzo Ferrari's thing. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have these like three dominating geniuses as a part of the story.
One of them is not alive. Also.
One of them is not alive, but his son is trying to sort of fill his large shoes and keep the family business as successful as it was when Henry Ford Sr. passed. And there's a wonderful scene, or a part of that rant, the insulting rant that Ferrari sends back to Ford II is like, you're not your fucking father, man. Like, you're a sham and your cars show it. Which is, I think, a key motivator for Ford. It's after he realizes that Enzo Ferrari said that, that's when he's like, all right, here's your blank check.
Right.
Do whatever you can to beat that spick, I think is the slur that's used.
Which, well, I don't remember the exact wording he used. But it was totally derogatory.
It was definitely a slur, yeah.
What I want to ask you before I give my hot take is, do you consider this a superhero movie? Because the structure is very similar. It's someone who has a unique talent, who is held back by society. Spider-Man versus J. Jonah Jameson yelling, "Get me pictures of Spider-Man. We got to arrest Spider-Man. He's a menace to public health." That's why J. Jonah Jameson always wanted pictures of Spider-Man, because he believed that Spider-Man was actually causing all of the problems in Manhattan and not beating up the supervillains that were doing that.
What are the other parallels? There's no supervillain.
The supervillain might as well. That's something that I think is vague corporate America. But I'm just saying, most superhero movies involve some element of someone with a unique talent being held back by the system, and then in the end, they finally save the day when they prove their haters wrong.
Well, I mean, that's the story of a lot of non-superhero movies, too. You know?
I'm just saying that unique talent to, I have the brain that allows me to build a supercar, and then I'm going to race it faster than anyone else can around a track. At the time, it feels somewhat supernatural, because there's part, and one thing I really want to say about this movie is that it's beautiful. Some of the shots driving at night, just the way that they show moisture, the way that you see images in Christian Bale's sunglasses. One thing that actually this movie,
color palette of the movie is really pretty, and definitely a good tribute to like retro racing culture and like all of the brands that were involved in that. I really like the color palette of the film. It's really pretty.
One thing I want to know, and it's funny, when this movie came out, one of my coworkers was a huge car guy, and he talked about it being movies for people like him, just people that really nerd out about the mechanics of the car. And this movie really made me want to know how much brakes have evolved. Because there's a lot of points in this movie where the car will be going really fast and the wheels look like they're on fire. And they talk about in the movie about how they have to put in these new brake lines all the time because they're overheating. And to my knowledge, that's still not the case. But I think that's an interesting detail that also plays into the theme of being held back by things slowing you down. You know, Christian Bale. You know what I mean. It feels like kind of a layered metaphor, even if it's factually true. That the one thing that's wrong with this perfect car is that we can't hold it back fast enough because when we try to hold it back, it blows up in our faces, which is also the plot of the movie.
Well, there's this whole thing with racing is not a sprint; it's a marathon.
Unless it's Formula One, then it's a sprint.
Well, obviously, like things like...
My last name is Schumacher. Every person not from America who has ever met me asks if I'm related to Michael Schumacher, who's like the Michael Jordan of F1 racing.
That's funny. Because of my job, I have had to learn a lot about automotive racing in the last 6 months. And you just love it.
It's
my favorite thing.
That's just the best part of your day.
It's a weird sport. With quote unquote athletes, but those athletes are not it's all about stamina. It's all about longevity. And when you're a runner running long distance versus short sprints, controlling power and controlling the heat of your body, and the tempering the amount of energy you're putting into the race at any one given time is the core problem. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what's going on in this race with this very powerful car that they create. After Ford is turned down by Ferrari and deeply insulted by him, he hires Shelby, who hires Ken Miles as the driver to develop Ford's own car. And Ken Miles has this, again, genius level ability to drive a car and let you know just how you can remove weight from it, just how you can improve aerodynamic qualities, like just what it needs. Like he drives the car for an hour and says like, okay, here are 3 things we can do to improve the speed and power of this car. So he's always thinking about power, and he's a real pedal to the metal fella. But of course, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So I think controlling this very uncontrollable genius, and then also controlling like the heat of the vehicle, the level of those brake pads.
It's too powerful.
It's too, he's a fire that burns bright but kind of burns himself out fast, and the car is kind of the same. They're one and the same. Exactly. So they're using that storyline a lot, but most races are like that, where it's all about there's a risk balancing act.
Distance races, I think, specifically.
Yeah, almost all races are a distance play in some way. Not all of them, but like most are. Even a NASCAR race is like X laps. You can't blow a tire on the first few. You want to,
stock
keep
car
your
racing
car.
lasts, days. It's one thing that blew me my mind about Le Mans, just the endurance that it would take to go through something like this, is that you did mention that it's 24 hours long. I mean, I can't imagine going 200 miles in a car, period. I've never gone that fast.
Oh, one of the best scenes is when they take this, Ford the second is this fat, aging, probably late 50s white guy, and he's never ridden in a car like the car that they are building for this racing program. And they need to convince him of something, and so they take him on a spin. And they hit 260 miles per hour during this.
And he's crying at the end of it.
And he has an identity crisis, and he says, do whatever you want. You guys are clearly... Is superhuman is a good example of that moment where he just looks at them like, okay, you're not mortals, and I'm just going to defer to you.
Right.
Here's all my money. Go win me a trophy.
If you're in the open desert and there's no obstacles around, nothing you can run into, no one else anywhere near you, would you still feel comfortable driving 200 miles an hour?
No. I'm the kind of person who feels uncomfortable over 60, period.
It's something that I think is...
You have to trust the vehicle not to fall apart.
Right. Well, and Christian Bale's character is just... Ken Miles is just in tune enough with the vehicle until the very end that he really knows how far he can push it, and himself by extension. There's a scene where the car does blow up, basically, and he gets carried out of it because he knows that he had a fireproof suit on. And it's funny, it was kind of foreshadowing in that moment when one of the other mechanics is talking to Ken Miles' son and says that, as long as the door doesn't jam, that suit that he has on is fireproof. So as long as you can get out of the car, you will get out of the car. And I believe the crash at the end of the movie is just a bridge too far for him to actually get out. We don't see a lot of it. I love that scene because there's this narration of, once you get past, I think, 150 miles an hour, the car disappears and you're just a body floating.
I think it's, rotations per minute.
Yeah,
Matt Damon has
he was saying
nice...
7K RPM, but
I think it's 600.
Well, it's 1,000.
6,000 is the special number. And after that point, you're just a body floating and moving in space or something. There's kind of a poetic speech that is performed at the very beginning of the movie and the very end of the movie.
That's kind of another reason that superhero / other competition movies came to mind for me, because I've seen so much media where there's this discussion of during boxing or fighting of some kind, there's this moment where time slows down, where you're just paying your attention, your focus is so intense that you feel like everything is slowing down, and you'll see that fist coming at you, or you'll throw the giant meteor away from the planet.
Yeah.
It definitely has a lot of language of man-to-man competition in general. Even though it's you in the car against many other people, I think this phenomenon of your brain just slowing stuff down when you focus is literally life or death is just something that they make seem very cool.
I mean, I think, what they're describing is called flow state.
Yeah.
And it occurs in many physical activities, but it is sort of this magical thing that...
yes, it is quasi-magical in this movie. But that's also how the movie portrays it, and the color palette also just... it's more grounded than a Marvel movie would be, I think. Marvel movies are so CGI heavy, and this movie just feels like it's really cleaned up, but I don't think there's any CGI in this movie. I mean, probably when they're going around the track at night, and the effects of the wheels being red when the brakes are braking, I think was added in, because you don't want someone in a car if the brakes are actually failing.
Sure. I don't know. Yeah, I didn't really think about it much. It's definitely a very dreamy, kind of glossy, good cinematography kind of film.
I think it's interesting too that it really focuses on the Americans and Ken Miles so much, because they have these rivals in Ferrari and Ferrari's team. They name the Ferrari driver in the 21 Ferrari Angelo Bandini, I think. And we know nothing about him. I don't know anything about him other than he's an extension of Ferrari's will that's driving the car because he's too old to do it himself. And that's something that I wish the movie would have explored more, but I don't think that's the movie that was being made here. I think this is a story about corporate America holding back art and good things from being made so that mass-produced things can be made. All of the things that the suits in this movie are doing it for a reason. No one is arbitrarily limiting Ken Miles just for fun. They're doing it because they want to standardize things, and they want to build up the image of Ford. Like that shot at the end of the movie during the race when the suit causes Ken Miles to lose because they want all three Fords to come in at the same time.
Yeah, it's all a marketing stunt.
It's all a marketing stunt. There is never an intention to build the best car. They are not athletes. Right. They're building the flashiest car that will get the most attention. And if it goes fast, that's great, but they want to get...
Well, they want to win the race.
They want to win the race.
That's how you win those headlines. Yeah. But, they don't care. They're not sportsmen. They're not craftsmen.
Right.
They're fucking suits.
Right.
And they're also egos. The suits are constantly trying to one-up one another, and everyone's trying to get in Henry Ford II's best graces. good graces, whereas the racers they only want to race. They just want to build the best car possible.
Right.
They're there for just radically different reasons. Matt Damon and one of the middle management guys have some really great headbutting moments. Matt Damon, who plays Carroll Shelby, who's an ex-racer who becomes a car designer, has some really great quippy lines about how, like, some men, it's not really about money or resources, it's just about a thing that you have to do. He has this wonderful speech about some people, force themselves to get out of bed for a paycheck or whatever. Some people do stuff because they just have to, and it hurts not to do the thing. And that's me with racing. And that is kind of the two different types of people, like the passionate, purpose-driven people, and then like the business guys. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the dichotomy they're playing with a lot.
Men will literally drive cars at 200 miles an hour rather than go to therapy, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Ken Miles needed some therapy.
He found it in his car, and then But I think the idea of obsession is present on both sides in this movie, right? Everyone in this movie, their character is built around an obsession. In the Suits case, it's an obsession with staying relevant in any way possible, right? They're worried about losing market share, but Ford Motor Company is financially doing fine. They're just the kings of the hills, worried about someone approaching them.
It's about legacy. Like, Ford the second has this awesome, huge legacy to uphold, right. And that's all he's thinking about, and it's very ego driven.
And it's very ego driven because he lived in the shadow of his father, but he himself has been in those footsteps and not really made an impression himself. I think he really feels the pressure in his old age to be like, I'm Henry Ford II, and I did something too, rather than just, put my father's company on cruise control, pun intended. Mm-hmm. And that ends up being what he's doing, because, I mean, I can't speculate on what the original Henry Ford would have thought about racing in general, because racing was never his goal. He wanted to make an automobile that he could sell a lot of, and also put Jewish people in concentration camps. Those were the two driving forces in Henry Ford's mind. My point being that I don't think Henry Ford the inventor of the automobile, so many of us think of it, even though that's incorrect. The inventor of mass production is really the better way to describe that. I don't think he would have cared about racing.
Well, it's hard to imagine, like, a sport involving a thing that got invented, like, last year.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it probably wasn't in his mind at all.
That's like saying, like, do you think anyone who played a role in, like, do you think John von Neumann, the father of current computer architecture, would have cared about esports?
Right. It's kind of, that's a big leap to make.
Yes. But he would have been a Dota player. John von Neumann absolutely would have been a gamer.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with you there. Anyway, highly recommend Ford versus Ferrari. I had to watch it for work, essentially, but I really enjoyed the film. I think it's kind of... It spreads itself really thin with the characters. I never really got that invested in any one of them. Mm-hmm. Matt Damon is a great character, Carroll Shelby, and then Ken Miles, played by... all I can think of is his other characters.
Patrick Bateman. Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Christian Bale.
Thank you. Bale. Oh my god. They're great. Ferrari's a great character, but he really doesn't get a lot of screen time.
Yeah, I mean, this movie could have just been called Ford, and obviously no movie would have been called that, but the movie is so centered on Ford. That's kind of why I brought up the fact that we don't know anything about their rivals. And it's because their rivals aren't Ferrari. The rivals are everyone at Ford trying to knife each other.
Yes, trying to knife one another. Yeah. The corporate structure, which is funny because you kind of explain, like, Henry Ford's real legacy is mass production.
Mass production. Standardization of parts.
Standardization of shit. Like, corporate bullshit.
Right.
And it's funny because that is, like, the Ford Motor Company's own worst enemy in this story.
Right. It would be for anyone.
I think that's why you don't learn much about Ferrari, is because he's like sort of this half villain, and the more you learn about him, the more you love him.
Right.
Because he's a fantastic character.
Yeah, I mean, the scene where he tips his hat to Christian Bale, as Christian Bale realizes that the suits forced him to throw the race and come in second to McLaren.
He's a guy who gets it.
You feel for Ferrari. Ferrari is the hero of this movie. He was doing it right this whole time, and as we now know, Ferrari, I believe, is no longer a bankrupt company.
It was purchased by Fiat.
Well, right. My point being that they still exist in some form, and I'm sure they have more control over themselves. They have more autonomy than they would had they been bought by Ford.
Well, absolutely.
That's what I'm saying.
The brand name we might not know that brand name.
Right. I mean, do you know McLaren?
Today. McLaren? The racer?
No, McLaren was the company. The company that makes the car that ended up winning. McLaren is a brand of very fast luxury cars today. That is just...
Wait, are you talking about in the movie or outside the movie?
So the guy that won was a racer for McLaren. His name was not McLaren.
Oh, he's the second Ford driver.
Oh, really?
His name was McLaren.
Okay, I had that confused. I assumed it was McLaren, the company that makes luxury cars now. That
guy might have started a company. That's kind of how this world works.
I'm kind of curious about that.
No, I thought McLaren was just the second Ford driver. Because they ran 3 vehicles in the race, and they wanted that picture and stuff. I think McLaren is going to be the head driver at one point during the movie.
Oh, that's right.
Comes
they do
by.
mention
This
his
is
name.
when Ken Miles is still just working on cars, but he's like been demoted.
Yeah.
And he takes like 3 laps around the track, and he's like, "I love it. It runs great." Mm-hmm. And Ken Miles is like,
"You can't know that just
you can't
after,
know that after a lap around the
right.
like he." So he's kind of considered like less thoughtful.
And like a Ford guy, he cares less. He just wants to get in a car that goes fast. He doesn't seem like he's the guy to get his hands greasy.
Right. Closing thoughts. I would absolutely recommend the film, especially if you want to know more about the Le Mans race. It's a cool race, one with a lot of history. I'm glad I watched the film because I have to write about Le Mans for my job. But it was also really beautiful. I think maybe one more woman in the film would have been good.
I was going to bring up the fact that
one female
if
character.
you're looking for a movie that dives deep into the history of Ferrari and passes the Bechdel test, see Ford versus Ferrari.
There is one female character.
And it's Ken Miles' wife.
Yeah, and their relationship is interesting, but does not get explored very far.
Right. She's a prop to show you how much this guy values cars over his real family. That's what she is. She's not a character of her own.
They don't have a toxic relationship, but it's not great.
Well, she wakes up every day knowing that like my husband might blow himself up, and he makes that decision rather than like stay safe with his family or something, because this man has a real passion for cars. There are lifestyles available to him that are not going 260 miles an hour in a car that you welded together today.
Well, there are and there aren't. I mean, he is very single-minded in the sense that he thinks about cars and that's about it.
Well, my point being that...
And he's not really a people person. He does not get along well with others.
He gets along with others in the context of cars. All of the other people on...
Sometimes. He threw a wrench at Matt Damon's character the first time they spoke in the movie.
Right.
So I think it's the only thing he can do. And that's part of this whole, teams really can't do shit. It's the singular genius. And if you support a singular genius, you can be a part of something great. But I do think that a thesis statement from this movie is that great things come from great people. And those great people really got to do it by themselves because you need to have that vision and the clarity of that vision. I think there are great partnerships in the world, and those are kind of the exception to this rule, but largely, brilliance comes from a single mind and a single vision. And they're kind of making that point. And either you got it or you don't. Henry Ford II kind of doesn't have it. His dad did.
Right.
It's not, there's this great...
Henry Ford II is very proud of the tanks and planes they built in World War II. And this movie takes place in 1966. This is clearly a guy who's looking in the rearview mirror.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's really scared about what's in the windshield.
Right.
It was great. I don't know if I think I heard this from Scott Galloway, but I'm sure it's an idea from somewhere else. Talent is the one thing that is not passed down from generation to generation the way all the other privileges are.
Oh, it's like that.
It's the one thing that is magically, randomly dispersed throughout society. It is not about gender. It is not about race. It is not about status, wealth status. Of course, all of those things can contribute to whether or not you're allowed to use your talents and genius to their fullest capacity. But talent and genius is random.
I think that there's a great quote in Mad Men about a rich guy talking about his son just blowing his inheritance and saying, like, you weren't there when I was swinging the pick. And this guy wasn't literally a gold miner, but the idea being that, like, so much of genius, if you have it, is doing the hard work to manifest that and to materialize it and to put everything together and doing the little detailed work that isn't fun and tedious to bring your vision together. And people associated with that often don't see that and look at the finished product thinking, this is how it's always been. The finished product was like this from conception to the finish line. And I think that's kind of what this movie gets at. Because again, like, Henry IV II isn't a bad guy in this movie, but he's clueless. He's not someone with any ideas of his own, and everyone is vying for his approval, but he is not putting forward anything himself. He is someone to be convinced, but he is not a leader.
Yeah, he does not have that vision.
That's
that magic vision that's going to, lead that company into the future.
One thing that I wanted to also discuss about this movie is this is the kind of movie that is made to win an Oscar. It didn't feel especially Oscar baity watching it, but the title is Ford versus Ferrari. It's got some high profile actors in it. Do you feel like this movie is Oscar bait? As in a cheap ploy to win an Oscar rather than to make a good movie.
It's funny because, like, the Oscars have been, like, they've been on this, like, very woke trend lately. And the film does not check a single wokeness box.
Not.
There is...
Absolutely not.
Exclusively white people.
Filled with POC, people of cars.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all it is. Yeah.
There's one woman in the film. There
are Italians.
Yeah. The closest thing you get to a person of color is a very Italian Enzo Ferrari. Yeah. So, no, I don't think it's Oscar bait. I do think, though, it was like, hey, what if the Fast and the Furious movies were like an Oscar film?
Oh, my God.
Like, if you ask that question, this is what you get. Like, it's about cars. It's about dudes who love cars. Dudes who bond over cars because they can't just bond as friends. These men have a tough time with that. It's totally like that. Like, it's like a family sort of thing. The
Fast and the Furious, to my knowledge, because to anyone listening to this, I've not made it through a Fast and the Furious movie.
I have not either. I have to, though, because of my job.
I don't know. I mean,
anyway,
whatever you want to do to yourself.
I think that it really is it's an exercise in that. Like, okay, what if we made a movie about cars that was actually Oscar worthy?
I think this does a good job of kind of showing how cars and mechanics kind of become a religion for certain people. Because it captures their entire mental capacity. All some of these people can think about is making car more efficient, going faster, beating other people. And that kind of single-minded focus also applies to every other sport and competitive behavior men engage in. It's just the certain flavor that brings these people together. I mean, you look at any football movie, and those people are also putting themselves in danger. I mean, CTE isn't discussed a lot in sports movies, to my knowledge. But the idea of people coming together over a singular goal, which is just beating another group of people, I think this is an interesting sports movie. It's a sport that not a lot of people understand, at least in America. I think it's I think it's bigger in Europe. That's why it's
very
Le Mans. Yeah. But, like, I don't know a lot.
The guys I write about for work, like, here they're celebrities and they're very in their own very small world.
Yeah.
But, like, people who are really good racers from Spain are actual celebrities.
Yeah. Like I said, everyone I know, not from this country, knows who Michael Schumacher is. Yeah. I had a boss from Brazil years ago who, just laughed at that because Schumacher is such a common name. But, no, these people are real celebrities where this kind of racing is big. And it's just something that is a total blind spot for a lot of people in this country. Which, again, is a blind spot for Ford.
Yeah. I kind of wish that they had brought it full circle and, like, told you whether or not the marketing ploy worked. Like, did sales go up? I think the Ford Bronco comes out kind of shortly after this film is made, which is sort of the off-road race car. That came out, I think, in like the mid-60s.
See, stuff like that is kind of why, and maybe something called like Buy America would have been too vague because they're competing with other American brands. But like, I've heard that phrase "Buy American" so often, it never specifies if you're supposed to buy General Motors, Chevy, or Ford, or other American brands that I'm not aware of. But this is a movie about America. This is a movie about corporate infighting and Americans hurting each other and using foreign labor and Ken Miles to get the job done.
I know. The funny thing is, he's like helping Ford take this big prize for America, but he's from England.
Yeah, I mean, the prize isn't even the goal. He doesn't want personal glory. He wants to go fast.
Ken Miles, yeah.
Ken Miles, yeah.
Well, I think too, he's obsessed with cars. And
he's obsessed with cars.
He wants to build the perfect machine.
Yeah. But not necessarily for Ford. That's what I'm saying.
No. Yeah. It's just the opportunity to do so. Yeah. And that's the rub with racing. Mm-hmm. Racing is an incredibly wasteful and incredibly expensive sport to participate in. Like, the number of tires you go through as a professional off-road racer is disgusting. Mm-hmm. Especially considering, like, just the ecosystem tires come from and just how expensive and how much energy it takes to create one. And
how ethical do you think the industry of cultivating rubber is? You know,
it's bad. It's in trouble.
It's terrible.
I work for a tire company, and like, of course, we don't talk about it much, but it's rough.
Yeah.
Rubber is not a renewable resource.
No. It's more that it's
a very slowly renewable resource.
It contributes to more pollution than we can really grasp or can be conveyed in this movie.
Really hard to do stuff with rubber after that tire blows. But anyway.
Last question on this movie, and then we can move on.
Okay.
Do you think this movie would have been as good as if it were about jockeys instead of about car races?
The parallels are clearly there.
Yeah, because you're talking about a racing sport that is hugely wasteful and expensive and takes up an outsized number of resources.
It's sort of just like for rich people.
Prove
they're better than one another in this way. Mm-hmm. Very expensive. It's so expensive to even sit in one of these cars. Mm-hmm. Like. And I thought about it too with the body type thing. Like, I was reading this Instagram post about how much Christian Bale's weight has fluctuated for different roles, and his last big movie was Vice, and he was like really overweight for that movie to play Dick Cheney, and then this movie he's very sinewy, he's lithe, he's not.
But that's like normal Christian Bale because
it might just be his normal self, but I think the character is supposed to be kind of a small guy because every pound counts with a race car, and so you want someone who's strong and has a lot of like physical stamina because he has to stay awake for 24 hours,
right?
Not quite the whole time, but he has to be like very alert for long periods of time. But you don't want someone who's super bulky. Yeah. So he's kind of got jockey vibes just from that, too. You want a jockey who's really strong and can hold on to a horse, but also someone who doesn't weigh that much. Mm-hmm. That is definitely a parallel I thought about.
I would love to watch this version of this movie, but about jockeys instead of car racing. But that's just me and completely unrelated. So we have another movie that we wanted to talk about tonight in Border, which is... I just want to say a few things before we get into this. Okay. One favorite movie I've seen in 2021. Wow. Yeah, not going up against a lot, but I love this movie.
It was good.
Two, this movie is extremely unsettling, and I'm hesitant to recommend it to anyone because it is extremely
not for the faint of heart.
Absolutely not.
It's not, but it is really cool, and I've been thinking about it all day. We watched it last night.
Yeah, I mean, this inspired a lot of conversations, and this movie won Cannes, but I mean, in my limited knowledge, it kind of flew under the radar because I hadn't heard about it until someone on TikTok recommended it to you.
Yeah, I learned about it on the talk.
But this movie, it's hard to, like I said, recommend because it goes to, I said over and over when we were watching it last night, there are choices this movie makes that remind me of Asian cinema because there are choices that no American film studio would ever allow to get through.
It's hard stuff to stomach.
Yeah, and it's daring and horrifying and also very, dare I say, human, despite the fact that And this is where...
Definitely about humanity. It is 97% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I brought that up last night, that the IMDb score, I think, is like 7 or less than that. And Rotten Tomatoes is 97, because this movie is going to turn some people off. It goes to places...
I'm sure the audience score and the critic score is very different for this film.
Well, that's why I said IMDb, because IMDb is just people,
it's
not
just people.
rating.
All right, I'm going to read the synopsis.
Yes.
Honestly, though, if you haven't seen this one, I would pause the podcast and, like, watch it first, because we're probably going to spoil some things. But here's the synopsis to see if you're interested. Customs Officer Tina is known for her extraordinary sense of smell. It's almost as if she can sniff out the guilt on anyone hiding something. But when Vore, a suspicious-looking man, walks past her, her abilities are challenged for the first time ever. Tina can sense Vore is hiding something, but she can't identify it. Even worse, she feels a strange attraction to him. As Tina develops a special bond with Vore and discovers his true identity, she also realizes the truth about herself. These two also look very similar. She's like looking into a mirror when she looks at this Vore guy.
And it's not that they look similar, it's that they have similar deformities.
Yes. She is a very deformed looking woman. I'm looking, oh my god, look at the actress.
Yeah, I know.
She's a beautiful Swedish lady.
And when we say deformity, one thing that you commented on, Shannon, is that they really don't look deformed so much as they look like Neanderthals. They look like
Cro-Magnon, like the early humans.
Early humans. They've got really thick brows. The guy looks like the Geico caveman. Like,
yeah, he does.
Very, very, very close to it.
Very close to that.
And it becomes clear that that's kind of intentional.
Yeah, there's sort of this resting disgust face that sort of exists. Obviously, the actress and actor wear a lot of prosthetics to look that way. And throughout the film, you learn more about their bodies and how they differ from the, a typical humans. But you don't really know anything about her other than she has that face, and she's really good at her job as a customs officer because she can kind of smell stuff.
That's something that I found interesting in the movie, that she is very respected at her job. I mean, like I said, she has what appear to be facial deformities, but the only people that really give her any respect are her father and her coworkers. The guy that she lives with, relationship kind of unclear, does not respect her.
No.
Most people don't respect her. I mean, you have people calling her an ugly bitch throughout the movie, and there are moments where that really affects her because she's tough, but like you can only take so much.
You kind of, the first, act of the movie is just you kind of learning about what her regular life is like, and it's incredibly isolating.
Yeah.
But she has a special connection to, like, nature.
Yeah,
she spends a lot of time just, like, walking barefoot in the forest and, like, bathing naked in this, like, beautiful little waterfall and, like, saying hi to foxes. Like, she has a relationship with a fox and with a moose and with some animals in her. She lives in a wooded area in, I think, rural Sweden, right? But obviously near the border because she works a border patrol job at a port, like a port authority.
And we went into last night the reason for naming the movie Border. And we kind of came to this consensus that she is at the border between humanity and
something else.
Yes.
And we learn later she's sort of intersex, so she's at the border of like genders.
Right.
The idea of genders. She's sort of at the border of society at large. Like, she lives a really isolated life. Right.
But she's allowed to
literally on the outskirts of a city. And does not participate in society beyond this job she has. Yeah.
That's something that I kind of noted, that she's allowed to participate in society because she's good at her job. Her coworkers respect her, and not really anyone else does.
Right.
And that I bring that up because the other guy...
She's not exactly charming either.
Right.
She does not speak very often.
She speaks very authoritatively in her job because she's a border guard.
Right.
But my point being that the other guy that looks like her, that she has this connection with, does not participate in society. He has no interest in participating in society, in part because the job that he does is horrible. But
calling that a job is silly.
Well, yeah.
But he has, he's sort of a drifter, nomadic figure who has made a very distinctive choice to not participate in human society. In fact, he has a lot of hateful opinions about humans and thinks that they're a scourge on the earth and very parasitic in their relationship.
This movie tells it like it is.
Honestly, it's funny because you kind of agree with a lot of things he says. Like, yeah, humans are parasites. We're totally ruining the planet. Like, we're terrible to one another and to other animals. And
part of why he's saying that, you also noted, is that he's echoing a lot of things we've heard from native people who have been displaced from their lands. You know, a lot of what he says in some of his rants could fit very well into Native Americans' gripes with Europeans colonizing America, Aboriginals being colonized by Australians, and just the concerted effort to remove a people and a culture in these people.
So the big spoiler is these two belong to a similar species that are, they don't really ever say magic, but they're called trolls.
They're trolls.
I think trolls are magical figures in Swedish folklore.
Yeah.
And these trolls were almost all but exterminated by like government practices.
We later learned that the main character's parents were studied / tortured to death in a psychiatric asylum, and she was saved because one of the people working at this asylum wanted a little girl to take care of. And they just taught her that you're one of us. You're not any different from us. You just have this medical condition.
You have like a chromosomal
So we're going to raise you in our
flaw.
schools. We're going to raise you in our culture. And you're going to become one of us, even though you don't look like that. And that just reminds me of
That's kind of where that native
That's where the
storyline,
native...
Yeah.
It really echoes to me the problems of how Australians dealt with Aboriginals. More specifically than America, because, I don't know, America was more upfront about just executing people, but Australia really tried to exterminate a culture by forcing native families to give their babies to
And that totally happened in the U.S. You had to go to these boarding schools where your hair was cut and you had to accept your white name and you had to learn English and you had to try to... They did their darndest to make you forget whatever your native language was. Yeah, it's a similar story. The difference being there's this sort of species difference.
Yes. Yeah. That's
element
where that
to the
falls
story,
apart,
which is where you get... I mean, obviously Native Americans were also dehumanized, but this is an extra layer of that, where it's even easier to dehumanize her because she's literally not a human.
Yeah.
So we learn about there's a group of trolls who all live together. They're hard to find. They have to find you in Finland, and Vore, this he looks male. They're both intersex. Gender does not totally apply to these creatures. And he says, like, I'm kind of thinking about running away to Finland and maybe joining this group. Like, you should come with me. And we learn some other really gross things about them, that ultimately turn her off. And also just, there's a lot of hatred in his heart. He really hates humans, and he actively works to hurt them.
Right. His words of, I want to... What was the actual line? Because it came to be that I want to use their systems to hurt them, for people.
I want to help them hurt themselves.
I want to help them hurt themselves. Like his way of... I mean, it was interesting that they bring up trolls, which is a trope in Nordic fairy tales, in addition to the trope of the changeling. And they get into that in a way that, you know, we've gone to some spoilers at this point, but I just don't want to talk about it. Like, I don't know if we need to discuss the changeling aspect, or how... All you need to know if you're listening to this podcast is that this very morbid Nordic fairy tale is very much brought to light in a way that is shocking. I'm not often shocked by movies or unsettled by movies. I'm usually pretty numb to horror movies because I grew up watching
creepy.
Saw and stuff, and you can't hurt... It's
got a subtlety. Everything is very subtle. The events unfold very slowly, and it doesn't hit you over the head. There are no jump scares, but it's just... You have an eerie feeling about her from the beginning, and it never goes away, and it just gets worse. And then things layer, and then you have eerie feelings about him, and then they're very much confirmed. And Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the movie, you're totally rooting for her. She's good. She made the conscious choice not to hurt people the way that this guy did, that Vore did.
Yeah.
And she says the line, like, I don't wish to do evil. And there's a lot of troll growling in between that. I really do like how they have an animalistic side, but also a side that allows them to be gentle with animals. This guy has the power to tell a moose what to do and stand in the middle of the road to block a car.
Yeah.
And she has the ability to connect with animals. And it's just this kind of pure love feeling that you get from seeing the goodness in the hearts of these creatures. Less so Vore. But this is a very human movie. This is it's a very deep character study of what leads people to both commit violence and to choose not to commit violence when they've been wronged. She's been wronged her whole life. She was lied to about her parents, justifiably. I don't think the father acted terribly in saving her from the life that she was.
That is such a sad story to tell a child.
Yeah.
You're never gonna be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. And like how is she better off even knowing? I don't know. There's plenty of argument to be had there. But
maybe yes, maybe no, because she's felt alone her entire life. And she's with, again, the relationship between this guy that's living with her is not totally clear, but we think that this guy might be kind of like a boyfriend that doesn't work. Because he's
definitely a freeloader.
He's a freeloader, but like, is he your boyfriend because he drunkenly tries to have sex with her at one point?
He does, yeah.
Or is he someone
I think they're just companions.
They're just companions.
And it's funny, I thought at first, there was one scene where she was going to touch herself. Like, the question of her sexuality and if she was asexual came up to me. Eventually you learn that, like, oh, she's a totally different species whose sexuality is kind of hidden even to her.
Yeah. Until
she meets Vore. And then finally understands, like, how her own body works.
They do so much with the sexual tension in the scene they first meet
so
without saying a word. It's amazing. It really is an amazing scene. It's just the looks on both of their faces that they're conveying through these masks and prosthetics that they have to wear.
Yeah,
that's an achievement.
Really interesting acting job for both of those people. They do a fantastic job. Obviously, it's a film in Swedish, so it's not all translated to me, but I thought their body language work. She has this stiffness to her.
Yeah.
And she's very formal. She's not loose, and she's just clearly uncomfortable.
And Vore
all the time.
Vore rebels in being this vulgar animal.
Yeah, he loves that he grosses out humans.
He loves eating bugs in front of people. He loves stealing all the salmon when someone else wanted some salmon. He has no desire to assimilate. Right.
Which makes him a much more he's just very interesting and more charismatic. Mm-hmm. But she is like frozen in assimilation and clearly hates herself on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
And her, like, the fact that she moves a little bit on the scale of self-love during the film is, like, such a win.
Yeah.
And the fact that she finally gets to see herself through the eyes of someone who's not repulsed by her is also such a huge win. It's a very awesome character study.
Because she's been told all her life that she has this chromosomal abnormality, and then when she realizes that, no, I'm a different species, and there are other people that look like me and will accept me, even if she doesn't go to Finland, that's a happy-ish ending.
Oh, yeah. And she does end up reproducing with Vore, and she has we leave with her kind of meeting this child for the first time. Mm-hmm. Big spoiler alert. But that's a pleasant ending, one full of possibilities for her to get a redo through her kid. Which is really nice and is comforting because obviously she was raised well, but not with a love and understanding that she needed.
Some amount of love, but there's no amount of understanding that can explain to a child when a giant part of their identity is being
trolls are born with tails. Her tail was cut off.
That was one thing that just felt so Nordic fairy tale to me. The fact that you're born with a tail and it draws lightning from the sky, and you're like, that's
Yeah, I forgot about the lightning thing.
Yeah, like you're best friends with a short guy that has a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
It's not a magical realist film. It's a realist film.
It's a realist
film. There's no sparkle. There's no magic. It's very subtle.
I mean,
things are just kind of off about her.
I will go back to the changeling thing a little bit because one thing that has been kind of bothering me is that there's the scene where Vore gives birth to what he describes is it's not a baby, it's more like a lump of clay.
He says it's an unfertilized
egg. Yeah.
So essentially, like, sort of the way humans have a menstruation cycle, Vore, who is, he looks like a man, he has more manly features than Tina, but they're both very intersex kind of creatures.
They're also he's played by a man. I think that's why.
He's played by a man, which is also part of it. He has a male sounding voice.
Yes.
But in this species, the male kind of has a menstruation type event that happens regularly. And he gives birth to a not fully realized troll, but something that looks like a troll.
Yeah. And that's what he's replacing babies with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like human babies.
Human babies. He'll sneak into your house, he'll steal your baby, and replace it with this unfertilized egg thing.
Yeah, with his like dirty tampon.
It's
more or less
disgusting on so many levels.
It is really
It is
deeply
morally disgusting.
So basically, mom goes to bed, wakes up, and her human baby is now just looks deformed.
Right.
So like what the trick is that mom doesn't think her baby's been stolen.
Yeah, she thinks there's a medical condition. You call the doctor instead of looking for the child.
Right. So it's kind of the perfect crime in some ways.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's really, really deeply wrong and deeply disturbing. Yeah. And once she hears about it, Tina dumps Vore. She says, "Get the fuck get out of my house."
So, and I brought this up last night. We've trended along some themes in movies we've watched. We have accidentally watched multiple movies that involve a lot of maggots.
Yeah.
Which has not been sitting great with me. However, we have also now entered our second dump her/him movie.
Dump him.
Yeah.
Definitely scream and dump him at the screen. It's sad too because you're so excited. I mean, he is the only.
I mean, this woman's like mid-30s, 40s, and she is meeting. This is probably her first.
I think it's her first sexual encounter. Yeah. Period.
Well, I don't know about that because the guy that she lives with has drunkenly tried to have sex with her. It's implied that possibly happened.
It did. Before. Yeah, you're right. But it's the first totally right and good sexual
emotional sexual connection.
Yeah, and it's so sad to have to say goodbye to the one person you've ever met who you've actually connected with.
I mean, she might end up taking a Finnish vacation and finding trolls that are not
shitty. Yeah,
child thieves.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this group of trolls in Finland and how they feel about.
Yeah, that's a good point because
obviously she and Vore disagreed deeply about the inherent goodness or evilness of humans.
Well, true, but Vore has also spent all of his life thinking about it. This is all new information to her that she's an entirely different species.
Yep,
Vore has had so much more time to process. These things have been trying to exterminate my kind.
He also hasn't had any success with that whole assimilation thing. Like she has a house, she has a job she's very good at and has respect from her colleagues. She during that job she ends up catching a pedophile ring, which he is sort of involved with. That's sort of how the truth gets unearthed.
Yeah.
But she has this big win where she, like, with her talents, helps solve a crime. And there's this huge realm of possibilities of, like, the things that she could do with her talents. And that the Swedish government is sort of realizing, like, oh my gosh, we have such an asset in this person at the border.
Just a great scene where the tension in the room is palpable when she catches the guy who is revealed to be trafficking child pornography. And they search his bag, nothing. They search his shoes and stuff, nothing. And then she takes his phone and finds a chip in it. And before she can, like, put it on the table, he grabs it and tries to eat it.
Tries to swallow it.
Because
he knows it'll put him away forever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was... there's these really cool border scenes where she just catches someone who's hidden things very well. It's great. Yeah, so she's got a future in human society where she is very ostracized, but she's not completely rejected. And her father is still there.
Her father's very insistent that she is his daughter, that she is part of their family. He repeats
it's clear he does really love her, and he felt remorse. He at first denies her claims that they're not really blood related, and then he comes around, which is a really nice moment. But it's tough because he's an old man, his memory's failing, and you just get the sense that, like, oh, you're not going to have this lifeline of family for much longer. And then what? Like, you're completely on your own.
And he tells her that, I know your parents are dead. I didn't kill them, but I know that those people are dead. And, like, you're not only losing me, you lost your real parents before you knew you had them.
Right.
There's a lot of heartbreaking scenes in this movie because there's a lot of scenes that are heart-building. There's a lot of things that make you just feel so much for this troll. She is someone who is just living her best life, and it's her against the world.
Yeah,
human society and troll society have awful things to offer her.
Yeah, that's true. The film has a very well constructed economy of pleasure, where it's so clear that her life is very lacking in pleasure. So then whenever she has a win, whenever she has success, or whenever she has a good day, it feels so good. And you're just rooting for her so hard the whole time from the beginning. Because she is clearly a super gentle creature, clearly someone who doesn't deserve the sort of ire she gets from everyone just because of the way she looks. Like she's immediately super, I don't want to say relatable, but
but that scene where
immediately it's so easy to have empathy for the character.
The beginning of the movie where she catches a guy smuggling liquor, the guy turns around and calls her an ugly bitch before he walks away, and first thing you see of her, she's this stern, confident woman, and she hears that, and there's just this drop in her face.
Yeah.
And she knows what she looks like, and she knows she's good at her job. Her job is something that gives her life meaning, and anyone can break her down because it's so easy to poke holes in that life. She's just an incredibly developed and thoughtful character.
Yeah.
And everyone in this movie is. I mean, I talked about it a little bit to Shannon, but I often don't like when movies use pedophilia in villains because it's such an automatic evil card. It's the equivalent of just branding supervillain on someone's chest because...
Yeah, it's a little lazy.
Well, right. But I think this movie differs from that standard. The movie that I think about with that, where it's kind of lazily using pedophilia to make you hate someone, is Kill Bill. And the second one, when you learn about Uma Thurman's vendetta against this warlord that I think had the crazy 88. Turns out he's also a pedophile. There's in this movie with samurai swords and guns, how do you know who the villain is? Because everyone is trying to cut everyone in half. Well, the guy that you're supposed to hate is a pedophile. Thought ended. But
it's a cheap way to justify violence.
That's what I'm saying. But in this movie, there's very little violence, and the points that are violent are quick and shocking. But I don't think this movie uses the trope of pedophilia. Let me be clear. Pedophilia is evil and something that I think should be condemned. But in this movie, it's a nuanced kind of evil. It's part of a larger system of evil and oppression. And that's what I liked about it. That the systems of oppression in this movie all feed into very horrible things. And that's why this movie doesn't have a true villain, dare I say that?
No.
Because Vorey is so... He's like the devil at the end of The Witch. There are sympathetic parts of his evil.
Yeah.
That give the character some nuance and, require some thought of, what would you do to this guy? If you were in a room with Vorey and you had a gun, would you shoot him? Probably. He's committing some horrible, borderline, attempted genocidal acts. But there's more thought in it than I have to kill him to save the world.
Yeah, Vorey's kind of a hurt people story.
Exactly, yeah.
He's not evil for fun. Or
he's evil because his evil is in his mind just.
And it's not really about his ego. It's about his like cultural identity.
Right.
He's a soldier in his eyes, I think.
Yeah, because the troll children were also taken from their parents, and he's trying in his mind. He's enacting some small form of what he considers justice.
Eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, sort of thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, but he's pro-blind world in that case.
He is. Yeah, he's the one who's going around blinding.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's funny because they don't really. I mean, she rejects him. Mm-hmm. But they are... I don't think he loses affection for Tina.
No, I mean, at the end of the movie, he mails her a postcard and her baby.
Yeah.
You know, if you mail someone a baby, you probably have some strong feelings toward them.
Yeah, I think he still really respects and has an affection for her.
Right.
Which is interesting. But yeah, they just did not have the same worldview regarding that identity thing.
And there's that great scene where they growl at each other without like physically fighting, where it's just about a battle of wills, and you see all of the violence in their eyes. No one's like throwing a chair at someone or throwing someone out a window.
Yeah, they kind of vie for dominance the way that animals
do.
And it's the gender thing. Again, they're both intersex in terms of like when they have sex, it's her who fucks him. Yeah. So there's this very muddled dominance thing. They like you can't infer dominance from their genders. Right. So they're sort of on an even playing field more so than like two humans who are a couple might be, which is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, man. It's weird and very disturbing, but I highly recommend giving it a watch.
It's an emotional movie. It's all over the place with it. Like I said, I'm so numb to so many horror movies that are particularly graphic in their depiction of pain. Yeah. Hellraiser is a cartoon. I love Hellraiser, but like the idea of watching in the sequel, they show you like someone actually pounding nails into his head, and that's not disturbing. Like it's gross, but nothing makes me like clench up near where my heart and torso is. Like just some of the reveals in Border. It's a powerful movie. Yeah. Super powerful. And definitely a thinker. Been thinking about it all day. I'll probably be thinking about it all day tomorrow. I mentioned last night that it reminded me of some Yorgos Lanthimos movies. Less The Lobster and more Dogtooth, which is about... I'm not going to spoil it because that's going to be my pick. That's my pick, actually, going forward. Okay. Well, I thought about Midsommar a couple times, just the way it's a very slow-paced film. Yep. Where you're just kind of like waiting for something to happen a lot. And it's got that beautiful setting with disturbing events thing going on. Taking place in Sweden. Yeah. Yeah, it had a lot of those vibes. So if you're a fan of that kind of movie, you like being freaked out and being challenged. I would say that Midsommar was harder to watch than this movie. Oh, yeah. Like, it's definitely less bloody, less cringy, less all the things. That's why I kind of think, again, that like this is absolutely not an American movie. Because I think if it was, some of the violence would have been crazier. Like, they would have thrown each other out a window at some point. They would have made a spectacle about how powerful these non-human creatures is. When, in this movie, we understand their power in their eyes, and their reactions, and their ability to get moose to do their dirty work. Yeah, it's a sensual power that they have. Exactly. It's a much subtler movie than you would see out of comparable American movies, like Midsommar, where you see someone who is being hung and has his lungs pulled out of his back, or you see, and I'm not trying to say that Midsommar is an inferior movie, but there are stylistic qualities that really tell you this is not an American movie, and thus not something you're listening to, or you're used to if you're listening to this podcast. This movie definitely felt like something that I hadn't seen before. There's a lot of new ideas in imagery and horror, frankly. But it's not a horror movie. It's a love story. It has technically happy ending. It's about loving yourself, which is really cool. And self-identity being so important. Right.
And she's just so lost without it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just get the sense that she is lost at sea in her own life until she finally learns this big, important fact about herself.
Yeah.
And then at the end, her identity is almost complete. Like, oh, I'm a mother now. Mm-hmm. I am a parent with a child to take care of.
I am a proud troll mother. And
I've doubled the purpose in my life. It's kind of, it's amazing.
It's triumphant.
That arc is very satisfying. Highly recommend. Give it a go.
I discussed a potential alternate title for this movie being ATAB. And I don't think all trolls are bastards, but Vore is a bastard.
Yeah, a little bit. Oh, that's another episode of Film Lovers. I'm Shannon Fletcher.
I'm Tim Schumacher. We'll see you next week on Film Lovers.
Mwah.